The ruins of New York City stretched out like a grim testament to a war lost long ago. The skyline, once a symbol of human achievement, now lay in ruins, overtaken by the crumbling remnants of skyscrapers and the endless echoes of devastation. Humanity had endured a war that threatened its very existence, a brutal conflict that left entire planets scared. The alien Exithar, advanced beyond comprehension, had descended from the stars with a singular purpose: eradicate humanity. They had succeeded. Earth was a desolate graveyard, its cities long abandoned, its fields scorched. The last survivors were scattered across the galaxy, few in number, clinging to the faintest spark of hope. Deep beneath the surface of New York, in an underground bunker built before the war, a group of scientists worked tirelessly to preserve what little of humanity's legacy remained. Dr. Amelia Kane, a pale woman with sharp features and dark, tired eyes, led the team. The bunker, a forgotten relic of the pre-war world, was eerily silent except for the hum of machinery and the occasional crackle of static from the communications equipment. Despite the weight of their situation, Dr. Kane's determination never wavered. The war had taken everything from her, her family, her home, but she was not willing to let humanity be erased completely. "We're getting closer," she muttered to herself as she stared down at a peculiar object resting on the cold metal table in front of her. It was small, no bigger than a fist, and covered in intricate markings that no one could decipher. The object was made of a material unlike anything found on Earth, its surface smooth and unyielding. But what made it truly strange was its warmth. It radiated an energy that pulsed faintly, almost as though it were alive. Dr. Kane's fingers hovered over the object, as if drawn by an invisible force. She had studied countless artifacts over the years, but this one was different. There was something undeniably powerful about it, something that whispered to her very soul. Is it alien?" whispered Dr. Dorian Matthews, her colleague, peering over her shoulder. He was a younger man, barely 30, but his sharp intellect and unwavering curiosity had made him an indispensable member of the team. His voice trembled with excitement, but Kane didn't respond right away. Instead, she continued to examine the object closely, her mind racing. "No," she said at last, her voice firm with conviction. "It's not alien. It's human. This was created by our ancestors." Dorian frowned. "But how? This technology. This isn't something we could have built." "The Exithar." "I know," Dr. Kane interrupted, her voice a low whisper. "The Exithar believe humanity is primitive, incapable of creating anything of value. But we know the truth. Our ancestors were more than we could ever imagine. And they left us something. This." She leaned in closer, her fingers brushing against the surface of the artifact. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the object emitted a soft glow, its markings shifting and rearranging like an ancient language coming to life. Kane gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. It's activating," she breathed, watching in awe as the markings pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. Suddenly, a blaring alarm shattered the moment. The high-pitched sound echoed through the bunker, sending the team into a flurry of movement. Dorian spun toward the monitors, his face turning pale. "It's the Exithar. They found us." Kane's mind raced as the realization hit her. The Exithar had discovered their location. Their last hope, this mysterious artifact, had been uncovered at the worst possible moment. There was no time to waste. If the Exithar reached them, it would be the end of humanity's fight for survival. "Activate the protocol," Kane commanded, her voice sharp and commanding. "We have to get this to the surface." The team scrambled to action, hastily preparing the equipment necessary to transport the artifact. Kane's thoughts raced as she moved through the chaotic bunker, her mind focused solely on the artifact. The Omega Protocol was something she had only heard whispers of in old, forgotten archives. It was said to be a power hidden deep within humanity, a gift left by their ancestors to protect them in times of dire need. If this was what she thought it was, then this relic could be the key to turning the tide against the HFY. But activating it would require more than just technology. It would require human strength, a bond forged through generations of struggle. It would take someone willing to bear the weight of the legacy. "Get to the surface," she ordered. "Now." As they hurried through the darkened hallways, Dr. Kane's thoughts were consumed by the mystery of the artifact. This was humanity's last hope. There was no turning back now. But as they emerged from the bunker, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just awakening an ancient power, they were awakening something far more dangerous. The surface of Earth was a graveyard. The sky was a sickly red, tinted by the ashes of the fallen world. The crumbled ruins of cities stretched as far as the eye could see, the faint sound of distant gunfire and explosions echoing in the empty wind. It was a world that had been abandoned by hope, left to rot under the shadow of the HFY. But in the wreckage of the past, something stirred. The artifact had been the first spark, and it would ignite a fire that would burn across the stars. Dr. Kane and her team reached the surface in record time, hauling the artifact through the battered ruins of New York. They moved with a sense of urgency. Time was running out. The HFY had already detected their transmission, and a fleet was on its way. This small group of survivors might be humanity's last chance to turn the tide. The artifact pulsed in Kane's hands, the strange symbols on its surface shifting rapidly, almost as if alive. She had no idea what it was fully capable of, but instinct told her that this was the moment they had been preparing for. As they reached a hidden outpost, a crumbling military base from the early days of the war, they set up the equipment to interface with the artifact. The base was barely functional, but it was the best they had left. "Ready, Dr. Kane," Dorian said, looking over his shoulder from the console. Sweat dripped from his brow as he input commands into the old systems. The monitors flickered with static, struggling to maintain a connection. The artifact began to hum, its glow intensifying as the systems around it powered up. A soft, eerie whisper filled the room, like a distant, long-forgotten voice. "It's responding," Kane muttered, her fingers trembling. This was no ordinary technology. It was something far beyond anything the humans had ever encountered. Suddenly, the room shuddered. A loud, booming noise erupted from the sky. Outside, the HFY fleet descended from the heavens, their massive ships blotting out the sun. Their forces had arrived, and they were not here to negotiate. "Dr. Kane, we have to activate it now," Dorian said urgently, his voice strained. "If we wait any longer, we won't make it." Kane nodded grimly. She took a deep breath and pressed her palm against the artifact, the warmth of it seeping into her skin. The moment her hand made contact, her mind was flooded with visions, images of humans long past, of a civilization that once ruled the stars, of battles fought and lost, of warriors who had wielded unimaginable power. She saw it all. The rise of the Omega Corps, the protectors of humanity, the guardians of the galaxy. But she also saw the cost. The power they wielded had been both a blessing and a curse. It had turned the tide in countless wars, but it had also led to their downfall. The warriors of the Omega Corps had sacrificed everything, even their souls, to save humanity from extinction. The price of their power had been their very humanity. As the vision faded, Dr. Kane was left with one undeniable truth. She was not just unlocking an ancient power. She was about to awaken something far deeper. The dormant Omega Protocol buried within every human. The Omega Corps was more than just a team of soldiers. It was a legacy, an extension of humanity's strength, encoded into their DNA. And now, it was time for that legacy to rise again. "We have no choice," Kane said, her voice steely with resolve. "We have to awaken the Omega Corps." She slammed her fist onto the activation console, and a room erupted in light. The artifact pulsed, the symbols on its surface shifting rapidly, and the ground beneath them trembled as the power of the Omega Protocol flowed through the system. The air grew thick with energy, crackling with the sheer force of the awakening. Outside, the Exethar ships landed, their ominous, sleek forms casting long shadows across the ruined Earth. But inside the base, something was changing. The Omega Protocol had begun to stir within the survivors, coursing through their veins, unlocking their hidden potential. Kane could feel it herself. A surge of strength, a new awareness, as if something ancient was waking up within her, guiding her. At first, it was subtle. A flash of insight, a burst of energy. But then, as the power of the protocol took hold, the transformation accelerated. Dr. Kane's body surged with newfound power. Her senses sharpened, her muscles strengthened, and her mind expanded with knowledge that felt alien yet deeply familiar. She was not the only one. Around her, her team, Dorian, Lieutenant Sophia Harris, and the others, began to undergo similar changes. It was as if they had been reborn, their true potential unleashed. Are we the Omega Chord now? Dorian asked, his voice full of awe and disbelief as he looked at his hands, which now crackled with energy. Kane nodded slowly, her heart racing. Yes, we're humanity's last line of defense. But we can't do this alone. Outside, the Exethar were preparing to launch their assault. But for the first time in years, humanity was ready to fight back. The Omega Chords had awakened, and with it, the legacy of humanity's strength, resilience, and unyielding will to survive. The battle for Earth and the future of the galaxy was about to begin. The sky above Earth had been a silent graveyard for far too long. Now it was alive with the thunderous roar of the Exethar warships descending, their massive forms blotting out the sun. The alien fleet, with its sleek black hulls and sharp angular designs, cast a shadow over the desolate landscape, a reminder of the invaders who had crushed humanity's last hopes. Their weapons were unmatched, their technology far beyond anything the remnants of humankind could dream of. But now, as the Omega Corps stood ready in their hidden outpost beneath the ruined city, a new fiery determination burned within them. Dr. Kane stood at the edge of the command platform, her fingers gripping the cold metal railing as she stared out at the darkening sky. Her body still hummed with the unfamiliar energy coursing through her veins, strength, speed, and insight that came from the Omega Protocol's awakening. She could feel the power surging through her, but it was not just physical. It was a deep primal force, an ancient knowledge flowing through her like a river of fire. "Ready the team," she ordered, her voice steady but commanding. She turned to Lieutenant Sophia Harris, who was now a vision of strength, her posture poised and determined. "We don't have much time. We have to hit them before they fully land and establish their ground forces." Sophia nodded, her eyes glowing with the same new power that flowed through all of them. "We'll be ready, Dr. Kane. Just give the word." Outside the base, the Exethar fleet continued its descent, the ominous sound of their engines vibrating through the ground. The Omega Corps, once mere survivors, had now become humanity's last hope. They had been forged by the power of the Omega Protocol, and though their enemies were fierce, they were not unprepared. As the Exethar ships touched down on Earth's scarred surface, their troops began to disembark, tall, menacing figures with armor that shimmered like liquid metal. The Exethar were no mere invaders. They were conquerors, their minds sharpened by millennia of warfare and their bodies enhanced by technology beyond comprehension. But as they deployed from their ships, a strange sense of unease swept over them. There was something different about Earth now. The air was thick with tension, charged with a new energy that even the Exethar had not expected. Kane's voice echoed through the communication system, galvanizing the Omega Corps. "Let's show them what humanity is capable of. We strike fast. We strike hard." The command was all it took. The team of Omega Corps soldiers, Kane, Dorian, Sophia, and the rest of the team, stormed out of the base, powered by the raw energy of the protocol. They moved with precision, as if their very souls had been synchronized by some higher force. The terrain beneath them was harsh, uneven, but they navigated it with a grace and speed that defied the laws of nature. Every step felt effortless, every movement fluid and exact. They were more than human now. They were warriors of a forgotten age, and they would not allow their species to be wiped from existence. The first wave of HFY troops advanced, unaware of what was coming. But the Omega Corps struck first. Kane led the charge, her eyes ablaze with a determination that could rival the fiercest storms. She moved faster than any human could, her body blurring with the force of her momentum. She reached the first wave of alien soldiers in seconds, her hand extended to send a blast of energy surging from her fingertips. The HFY soldiers reeled back as the blast struck them, their armor crackling and sizzling under the impact. The force of her attack left a crater in the ground, and the first line of HFY soldiers fell, their bodies crumpling to the earth. Behind her, the rest of the Omega Corps engaged in battle, their powers overwhelming. Dorian unleashed waves of psychic force, sending enemies flying backward with a mere thought. Sophia, her new strength making her unstoppable, plowed through the HFY soldiers, her fists punching through their armor like it was paper. Every member of the Omega Corps now fought as one, their powers acting in perfect harmony. Together, they were unstoppable. But even as the Omega Corps made their mark, the HFY began to regroup, adjusting to the unexpected resistance. The alien invaders' leader, a towering dark figure encased in black armor, rose from the shadows of his ship, his eyes glowing with the cold light of a predator. He was the warlord Koran, a being whose very presence sent ripples of dread through the hearts of his enemies. He had watched humanity for centuries, and he had underestimated them, until now. Koran raised his hand, and the ground trembled as a new wave of HFY soldiers stormed the battlefield. They were not like the others. These warriors were enhanced, each one a living weapon, their armor lined with energy shields and weapons designed to tear through the toughest defenses. "Bring them to their knees," Koran growled, his voice a guttural growl. The Omega Corps had barely made a dent before the HFY countered, unleashing their own devastating attacks. The ground split open as massive energy blasts filled the air. The battle had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Humanity's survival was no longer a question of hope. It was a battle for the future, and only one side would emerge victorious. Kane stood at the center of the chaos, her eyes locked on Koran. This was the true test of the Omega Corps. They had awakened the ancient power within them, but could they harness it long enough to win this battle and save humanity? The answer would come soon enough. The battlefield had become a storm of destruction. The once quiet streets of New York were now a war zone, filled with the crackle of energy blasts, the roar of collapsing buildings, and the screams of dying soldiers. The HFY forces, though momentarily taken aback by the sheer ferocity of the Omega Corps' first assault, quickly regrouped. They were calculating, adaptive creatures, and they had no intention of allowing humanity's last hope to flourish. Koran, the warlord of the HFY, stood at the epicenter of the chaos, his cold, unblinking gaze fixed on the Omega Corps. The sight of these humans, enhanced by an ancient power they barely understood, ignited a deep fury within him. He had watched them for centuries, these fragile, defiant creatures, and he had always believed them to be insignificant. But now, as he saw them fight with the power of legends, a deep sense of unease gripped him. Koran raised his hand, signaling his forces. "They are not mere survivors," he said, his voice low and resonant. "They are something far more dangerous. An ancient weapon has awakened in them. We must crush them before it grows." His voice rang out, filled with authority, and the HFY forces responded immediately. A swarm of alien warriors, their bodies encased in shimmering black armor, surged forward, their weapons glowing with a deadly, pulsating light. They were the elite of the HFY, the shock troopers, the most advanced soldiers in their empire. Their power was unimaginable, and their intent was clear. They would not stop until every last human was eradicated. But the Omega Corps was not intimidated. Dr. Kane stood at the forefront, her pulse steady despite the violence unfolding around her. Her heart raced with the same energy that flowed through her, a torrent of strength, clarity, and rage. The Exethar might have the numbers, the technology, and the experience, but they had never faced humanity like this. The Omega Protocol had unlocked something that was beyond science, beyond technology, something uniquely human, the will to fight, no matter the odds. "Form ranks," Kane ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Dorian, take the flank. Sophia, with me. We need to break through their lines." The Omega Corps members nodded, their expressions grim yet resolute. They had felt the weight of their transformation, each of them altered by the Omega Protocol in ways they were still learning to control. But what they had learned already was enough. They were no longer the survivors of a dying race. They were warriors, forged in the fire of humanity's struggle. And they would not go quietly into the night. The battle raged on as the Omega Corps charged forward. Kane led the charge, her movements a blur of speed and precision. Her newfound strength allowed her to leap over obstacles with ease, her fists striking down Exethar soldiers with brutal force. Each punch sent shockwaves through the air, knocking the alien soldiers back with an explosive force. Behind her, Sophia and the others followed, their attacks synchronized, as if they were extensions of each other's movements. The synergy between them was perfect, a testament to the power of the Omega Protocol. Dorian, standing further back, used his psychic abilities to devastating effect. With a wave of his hand, he hurled Exethar soldiers into the air, their bodies crashing into nearby buildings with bone-shattering force. His mind pulsed with energy, each thought a weapon capable of breaking the enemy's ranks. As he focused, he began to feel something stirring deep within him, a growing hunger, an insatiable thirst for victory. The power of the protocol was awakening something primal inside them all, something that bound them to the legacy of the Omega Corps. But Corrin was not easily defeated. As he watched the Omega Corps tear through his soldiers, a wave of anger surged through him. He was a leader, a conqueror, and he would not allow these humans to defy him. He raised his gauntlet, and the ground beneath the Omega Corps trembled. With a terrible roar, a massive energy shield erupted from his hand, enveloping his forces in a protective barrier that deflected every attack thrown at them. "Now you see the true power of the Exethar," Corrin sneered, his voice a harsh growl. "You are nothing but ants beneath my feet." Kane narrowed her eyes. The energy shield was formidable, but it wasn't invincible. If they could disrupt its power core, they might be able to turn the tide. She glanced at Dorian, who had already read her mind. The two locked eyes for a brief moment, and without a word, Dorian stepped forward, his focus sharp. He reached out with his mind, his psychic power wrapping around the energy shield, probing for its weaknesses. Meanwhile, Kane and Sophia pressed forward, their assault on the Exethar forces unyielding. They were relentless, moving through the enemy lines with brutal efficiency. But the closer they got to Corrin, the more intense the resistance became. The Exethar soldiers were stronger, more coordinated, and they fought with an intensity that matched the Omega Corps. Corrin's gaze remained fixed on Kane. "You are strong, human," he said coldly, his voice laced with contempt. "But you are nothing compared to what is coming." A low rumble echoed across the battlefield, and suddenly, from behind Corrin's fleet, a massive warship descended, far larger than the others. Its silhouette was a vast shadow against the flickering flames of battle, and its presence alone sent a chill through the Omega Corps. The true strength of the Exethar was about to be unleashed. Kane's heart skipped a beat. The fight was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The massive warship, far larger and more formidable than any of the Exethar ships that had already landed, loomed ominously in the sky, casting a long shadow over the battlefield. Its sleek black surface glimmered with deadly intent, and the power emanating from it was palpable. As it descended, a low hum resonated through the ground, vibrating in the bones of the Omega Corps. This was no ordinary ship. This was the HFY flagship, the Varkor, an engine of destruction capable of obliterating entire cities with a single strike. Dr. Kane's eyes narrowed as she turned her attention to the vessel. The air was thick with tension. They had come prepared for an invasion, for elite forces and advanced weaponry. But this was something else entirely. The HFY had just pulled out their ultimate weapon, and it was aimed directly at humanity's last hope. "We've got to bring it down," Kane said, her voice grim. She could feel the heat of battle intensifying around her. The Omega Corps had already begun pushing back the ground forces, but the appearance of the Varkor had shifted the balance. If they didn't deal with the flagship, the battle would be lost before it even truly began. Sophia, her pulse quickening, turned to Kane. "It's too powerful. Even with our abilities, we can't take it down directly. But we can cripple its power sources." Kane nodded, her mind already racing. They needed to act fast. "Dorian, can you track its power grid? We need a weak spot, something we can exploit." Dorian closed his eyes, extending his mind outward, his psychic abilities flaring as he reached for the ship's energy signatures. His body shuddered with the effort as his mind brushed against the immense power of the Varkor. He could feel the pulse of the ship's core, an immense, pulsing energy that radiated outward like the heartbeat of some monstrous creature. "I've got it," Dorian said, his voice strained. "There's a weak point in its lower thrusters. If we hit it, we can destabilize the ship's power flow. It's not much, but it might be enough to give us an opening." "Then let's move," Kane barked. The Omega Corps moved as one, their bodies honed for battle, their movements synchronized. They darted toward the Varkor, knowing full well that they were racing against time. Every second they delayed brought the alien invaders closer to crushing them. The flagship hovered just above the city, its vast cannons now charging with destructive energy. The HFY forces, realizing the threat the Omega Corps posed, began to regroup, converging on them in a relentless wave. But the Corps wasn't about to be stopped. Kane led the charge, her hands crackling with power as she leaped into the fray, sending waves of energy out from her body, blasting apart enemy soldiers with each motion. Behind her, Sophia was a blur of motion, her newfound strength allowing her to plow through anything in her path. Together, they cut a swath through the HFY ranks, creating an opening toward the Varkor's lower thrusters. But Corin, the warlord of the HFY, wasn't far behind. His presence seemed to darken the very air around them. His cold eyes locked on Dr. Kane as she approached the flagship. With a savage roar, he summoned a storm of energy, his gauntlet glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. "You will not destroy my ship, human," Corin spat, his voice filled with venom. "I will end this war today." With a swift motion, Corin unleashed a devastating blast of energy toward Kane, the shockwave ripping through the air. Kane barely had time to react. She threw up a shield, but the force of the blast sent her crashing into the ground, her body slamming against the rubble of a shattered building. Pain exploded through her chest, but she gritted her teeth and pushed herself to her feet. She had no time for weakness. "Sophia," she yelled. "Dorian, now." Sophia and Dorian moved in perfect sync. Dorian focused his mind, creating a psychic barrier that absorbed Corin's next wave of energy, protecting Kane just long enough for Sophia to close the distance. With a roar of fury, Sophia charged at Corin, her fists glowing with raw energy. She slammed into him with the force of a freight train, sending the warlord staggering back. Corin snarled, furious at being so easily challenged. He swung his massive gauntlet at Sophia, sending a pulse of raw power that would have incinerated any other opponent. But Sophia dodged, rolling to the side and striking again, each blow pushing the warlord further back. Kane, now back on her feet, watched with growing awe. The power the Omega cores had unlocked within them was incredible. Sophia was not just fighting Corin. She was challenging him, forcing him to fight with everything he had. But even as the warlord was momentarily distracted, the Varkor was still descending. The ship's cannons began to charge once again, its massive turrets aimed directly at the Omega cores. "We have to finish this," Kane shouted. With renewed determination, Dorian reached out with his mind again, focusing on the weak spot he had sensed earlier. His brow furrowed with concentration as he pushed his abilities to their limits. The Varkor's power grid shifted under his psychic influence, a vulnerability opening up at the lower thrusters. "I've got it," Dorian gasped, his voice raged. "It's ready." "Now, everyone, move," Kane ordered. The Omega Course sprang into action. With Corin momentarily occupied by Sophia, Kane and Dorian dashed toward the weak point of the Varkor. The battle was far from over, but they had one shot, one chance to cripple the HFY flagship and change the course of the war. The fate of humanity hung on their next move. The Varkor loomed above them like a monstrous titan, its energy cannons charging with deadly intent. The ground beneath the Omega Corp rumbled as the alien flagship prepared to unleash its devastating firepower. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, the tension palpable in the air. Kane, Sophia, and Dorian dashed toward the thrusters, each step driving them closer to their goal, and closer to the brink of destruction. "We can't wait much longer," Dorian panted, sweat beading on his forehead as he pushed his psychic power to its limits. His mind reached deep into the heart of the Varkor, feeling the delicate balance of its energy flow. The ship's core was a pulsating force, its power radiating outward in waves. But the weakness was there. It was real. They could still hit it, but they had to be fast. Kane's eyes were locked on the alien flagship. She could feel the heat of its energy cannons, the air around her warping as the ship's weapons charged. Corin was still a threat, but they had no choice but to push forward. They had to disable the Varkor, or it would obliterate everything in its path. Sophia, her muscles rippling with strength, gritted her teeth as she smashed through an advancing wave of HFY soldiers. She didn't care that they were stronger, faster, or better equipped. She was fighting for her species, for the future of humanity. The Omega cores had unlocked something more powerful than the HFY could ever understand: the human spirit. And that spirit wasn't going to be crushed so easily. The enemy soldiers were relentless, but they were nothing compared to the raw fury the Omega cores had unlocked. As Sophia barreled through them, she created an opening for Kane and Dorian. They didn't stop to check if she was behind them. They couldn't afford to. The moment they reached the weakened thrusters, they would have only seconds before the Varkor unleashed its wrath. Kane's mind raced as she sprinted beside Dorian. She could see the energy rippling through the alien ship, feel the dark presence of Corin as he stalked them from behind, but she focused on the task at hand. They had one shot. She knew they had to strike precisely at the thrusters, the point where the ship's power grid could be destabilized. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was the only chance they had. Corin's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "You think you can defeat me, human?" he growled, his eyes blazing with cold hatred. His gauntlet crackled with energy, and he hurled a powerful blast toward them. The air around them crackled with electricity as the destructive force surged forward. But Kane wasn't about to let him win. With a fierce cry, she thrust her hand forward, summoning a shield of raw energy. The blast collided with the shield, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to shudder under the force. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and debris flew into the air. But Kane held her ground. She wasn't going to be stopped now. Dorian, meanwhile, had his mind focused on the ship. With a deep breath, he reached out, focusing every ounce of his psychic power. His hands trembled with effort, but his eyes glowed with determination. He could feel the weakness in the Varkor's energy field, a slight but crucial flaw that would send shockwaves through the ship's core if they hit it just right. The moment of truth had arrived. "Now, Kane," Dorian shouted. Kane nodded, her lips curling into a determined smile. She turned to face the thrusters, her hand outstretched, fingers crackling with energy. With a single, powerful motion, she thrust her arm forward, unleashing a wave of raw force directly into the weak point. The ground beneath her feet trembled as the energy blast struck the Valkyr's thrusters. The ship shuddered, its massive form lurching slightly in the air as the shockwave rippled through its structure. For a moment, everything went silent. The world held its breath as the Valkyr's power core flared bright with unstable energy. Then, with a deafening roar, the ship's energy shields flickered, and the thrusters exploded in a violent burst of light. The Valkyr's massive engines went silent, and the flagship trembled as its systems began to fail. But that wasn't enough. Kane knew they had to push further. The Valkyr wasn't going to collapse from a single strike. It was built to withstand destruction, and they still had to deal with Corran and his elite forces. Corran, enraged by their audacity, bellowed in fury. No. His gauntlet crackled with power as he launched himself forward, moving with inhuman speed toward the Omega Cores. He was a force of nature, a being of destruction incarnate. But Kane wasn't afraid. "Dorian, Sophia, hold him off," Kane commanded. Sophia, her energy pulsing with unrestrained power, charged Corran head-on. Their clash was a thunderous collision of strength and force, but Corran was unrelenting. Every time Sophia struck, he countered with brutal precision, his gauntlet glowing with dark energy as he struck back. But Sophia wasn't deterred. She fought harder, faster, pushing him back step by step. Dorian, standing just behind them, reached into the depths of his mind, summoning his psychic abilities to create a force field that surrounded them, buying them precious moments. But it wouldn't last forever. The Valkyr was weakening. The core had been destabilized, but they needed more. Kane's eyes blazed with determination. This wasn't over yet. The battle was reaching its boiling point, and in the heart of it all, the Omega Cores would make their stand. The Valkyr's shaking form loomed ominously above, its once imposing presence now faltering. The energy shield had flickered and weakened, the thrusters on one side had exploded, and Corran's rage had only intensified. Kane, her body strained from the powerful assault on the alien ship, felt her pulse quicken. The ship wasn't dead yet. It was wounded, but it still had enough firepower to wipe them out. The flagship's cannons were still charging, their ominous hum growing louder with each passing second. "We don't have much time," Kane shouted over the din of battle, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "If we don't finish this now, we'll all be dead." Sophia and Dorian were still locked in their battle with Corran. The HFY warlord was unlike any opponent they had faced. His strength, his speed, and his unrelenting fury made him nearly invincible. But he was beginning to show signs of wear. Each strike from Sophia pushed him back further. Each psychic wave from Dorian wore at his resolve. "We need to break him," Dorian gritted through clenched teeth, his mind pulsating with psychic force. He projected a barrier around Corran, slowing the alien warrior's movements just enough for Sophia to close the distance. With a growl of frustration, Corran tore through the psychic shield, his gauntlet crackling with dark power, but not before Sophia landed a blow to his chest. The force sent him sprawling, and for the briefest moment, Corran staggered. But that moment was enough. Kane's mind raced as she quickly assessed the situation. They had the warlord momentarily subdued. They had the weakness in the Valkyr's thrusters. But there was one final piece missing, a way to finish the flagship once and for all. She turned to Dorian. "Focus your psychic energy. We need to get inside the core, disrupt the system at its very heart." "I can't do it alone," Dorian replied through gritted teeth. "I'll need support." Sophia, still catching her breath from the struggle with Corran, nodded. "We'll be your backup. Just tell us what to do." "Stay close," Dorian instructed. "I need to create a direct connection to the core. If I can lock onto it, I can do the rest. but I'll be vulnerable while unchanneling that much power. Protect me." Kane clenched her fists, determination flooding her. She knew what needed to be done. "Then we'll cover you." The Omega Corps moved quickly, their synchronized efforts creating a powerful defensive perimeter. Corran, recovering quickly from his earlier blow, snarled in frustration, his alien eyes burning with hatred. The Varker's cannons were fully charged now, aimed squarely at the Omega Corps' position. But Kane wasn't about to let that happen. She sprinted toward the warlord, her hands glowing with radiant energy as she threw herself into his path. With a powerful push, she created a shockwave that knocked Corran off balance, buying Dorian and Sophia the precious seconds they needed. But Corran's retaliation came fast. With an enraged roar, Corran launched a blast of concentrated energy at Kane, the force like a thunderstrike. Kane barely managed to dodge, feeling the crackle of energy brush against her skin. She pivoted, launching a series of energy blasts of her own. The air around her crackled as each explosion sent debris flying in every direction, but Corran was relentless. He charged forward, his gauntlet raised, ready to strike. But Dorian, now locking onto the Varker's core, closed his eyes and focused all his psychic energy. He could feel the ship's systems, its artificial heart, pulsing with energy. A brief flash of vulnerability appeared. He reached out with his mind, his concentration so intense that the very air around him seemed to hum. His hands trembled, but his mind was as steady as steel. "I've got it," Dorian shouted, his voice trained. With a violent psychic jolt, he broke through the Varker's defenses. The ship's energy grid twisted, warping under the pressure of Dorian's psychic attack. As the core destabilized, Dorian released an explosive wave of energy, sending a psychic shockwave straight into the flagship's heart. The Varker's outer hull buckled as the core imploded, and the ship groaned in protest. Energy blasts fired randomly from the ship, its cannons firing wildly into the sky as it began to spiral out of control. But the job wasn't done. Corran, sensing the shift in his flagship, turned to face the Omega Corps with a snarl. He bellowed, his voice filled with fury. "This isn't over. You cannot defeat me." Corran raised his gauntlet, gathering all his remaining power into a single concentrated blast aimed directly at Kane, the Omega Corps' leader. She could see it coming, the crackling energy in the air, the terrible force gathering in the palm of his hand. He was going to destroy them all. Without hesitation, Kane leaped into action. Her body surged with energy as she sprinted forward. There was no time for hesitation. As Corran unleashed the blast, Kane collided with him, her energy shield sparking against his, and with a scream, she slammed her fist into his chest, with every ounce of power she had left. The force of the blow pushed Corran back, his form flaring with electrical energy. For a moment, it seemed like time slowed as he staggered. His eyes locked onto Kane's with a final, burning hatred before his body erupted in an explosion of energy, his form disintegrating in the wake of the blast. The Varkor, its core destabilized and its power grid shattered, began to crumble from within. Its massive form began to fall, the flames from its core illuminating the sky in a blinding fiery display. The Omega Corps had done it. The warlord was defeated. The flagship was falling. But there was no time to celebrate. The real battle for humanity's future was only just beginning. The Varkor was falling. The once mighty flagship of the HFY now tumbled from the sky, its massive frame breaking apart, splintering like dry wood under the weight of its own destruction. Its hull was torn open by the chaotic energies Dorian had unleashed, and the fiery core had erupted, sending a shockwave that rattled the ground beneath the Omega Corps' feet. The air was thick with smoke and debris, and the roar of the falling ship drowned out all other sounds. Kane stood at the center of it all, breathing heavily, her body worn from the battle but still standing. The HFY were still on the ground, scattered and disoriented by the loss of their flagship. But it wasn't over yet. There was more work to be done. "Is it over?" Sophia asked, her voice breathless, still alive with adrenaline from the fight. Kane's gaze swept the battlefield, the remnants of the Varker falling in a fiery trail behind it as it plummeted toward the earth. "Not yet," she said, her tone resolute. "The Exithar won't give up so easily. They'll try to regroup." Dorian, sweat dripping from his forehead, staggered to her side. His eyes were wide with exhaustion. "We've crippled their fleet. Their command structure is in chaos right now. They'll have to pull back for a while. But this isn't over until they're completely driven off." Kane nodded grimly. "We need to finish this. All of it. While they're disoriented, we strike." Around them, the Omega Corps readied themselves, still reeling from the intensity of the battle but unwavering in their determination. They had come so far, and now they had the momentum. There was no turning back. But even as they prepared to advance, a final desperate wave of Exithar soldiers broke from the edges of the battlefield, gathering under the leadership of a new general. This one was different, taller, more imposing, with a blade that seemed to hum with energy. He was clearly not like the others they had faced. The new general's eyes glowed with an icy blue light. "You think you have won, humans," he called, his voice amplified by a strange resonance. "This world will fall, no matter how many ships you destroy. The Exithar will never be defeated." Kane's expression hardened. "That's where you're wrong. You don't understand humanity. We don't just survive. We adapt. And now we're going to make sure you never come back." She stepped forward, her energy flaring around her like an inferno. "Omega Corps, we end this." With a fierce cry, the final charge began. The Corps surged forward, every member ready to finish what they had started. Kane, at the front, launched herself toward the Exithar general, the ground shaking beneath her feet as she accelerated with superhuman speed. The general raised his blade, meeting her head-on with a force that crackled with dark energy. Their weapons clashed, the sound of metal against metal ringing out as sparks flew. But Kane didn't flinch. She fought with everything she had, fueled by the fire of her people's survival. The battle was fierce. The new general was a skilled fighter, using his enhanced strength and energy blade with precision. But Kane wasn't fighting alone. Sophia and Dorian flanked her, their combined powers overwhelming the Exithar leader. Sophia's enhanced strength and agility pushed him back, while Dorian's psychic blasts distracted and weakened him. With a final brutal move, Kane launched herself into the air, delivering a crushing blow to the general's side. The force of the attack was enough to send him crashing to the ground, his energy blade scattering across the field. The Omega Corps closed in, and within moments, the general was subdued, unable to continue his fight. The battlefield went silent, the last remnants of the Exithar leadership now neutralized. The alien forces, broken and scattered, began to retreat, their command structure in tatters. The Omega Corps stood victorious, though bruised and battered. Kane looked up at the sky, where the last remnants of the Varkor were burning up as they descended, a symbol of humanity's triumph. The Exithar fleet, crippled and leaderless, was already beginning to withdraw, retreating back into the void from whence it came. "We've done it," Sophia said, her voice filled with awe. "We've won." But Kane's gaze remained steady, her mind racing with the realization that this was just the beginning. The battle had been fierce, but humanity had shown the universe that they were not just a species to be conquered. They were a force to be reckoned with. "Victory isn't just about defeating the enemy," Kane replied quietly. "It's about what comes next. We've won today, but the future is still ours to shape. And that means we must stay strong, stay united. For humanity." As the dust settled and the last Exithar ships vanished from the sky, the Omega Corps looked toward the horizon. Earth, their home, was still intact. They had proven that no matter the odds, humanity would always rise. They had written their own legacy, one that would never fade. The sun began to rise, casting a warm light over the battlefield. The first dawn of the new era, humanity's era.